We started our Grossglockner circuit in Kaprun after a couple of train and bus rides from Munich. Since we arrived in the early afternoon, we hiked to the Sigmund Thun Klamm, which is a really nice river gorge. The next day, I took 2 bus rides and a unique funicular called a Schrägaufzug to the trailhead, the Stausee Moserboden. The trail was easy in the beginning, but more difficult up and down the Kapruner Törl. Also, the last section to the Berghotel Rudolfshütte, the Steinerne Stiege, was not easy and required some sure-footedness. Rudolfshütte is a fancy Berghotel and quite popular, whereas I have met only a few people on the way to Rudolfshütte, which is, on the other hand, located at a really stunning place. The hike was 14.2 kilometers or 8.9 miles with an elevation gain of 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet and an elevation loss of 730 meters or 2,400 feet. Like many of our hiking days, this segment is also part of the Grossglockner Ultra Trail. On our second day, we hiked from Rudolfshütte to the Kolzer Tauernhaus. The trail over the Kolzer Tauern Törl, and the Törl is a little pass, is well marked and a little bit difficult. The last section to the Kolzer Tauernhaus is again easy with great views of many waterfalls. The Kolzer townhouse has a long history, but was unfortunately our least favorite hut. The hike was 10 kilometers or 6.3 miles long, with an uphill part of 330 meters or 1,100 feet and a descent of 890 meters or 3,000 feet. We really liked the views from the Kolzer Tauern Twirl and our little picnic and all the tasty blueberries at the Dorfer Lake. On our third day, we hiked from the Kolzer townhouse to Kals. This was an easy day along the beautiful Dorfer Tal, and we saw another Klamm or river gorge. The trail is mostly on an unpaved road, and the last part to Kals can be a little bit tricky to find if you want to avoid the main road. The hike was 9.9 kilometers or 6.3 miles long, and again mostly downhill with an elevation loss of 470 meters or 1,500 feet. We liked hiking in the peaceful Dorfertal, the Klamm, which we did not expect to be so beautiful, and the small town vibe of Kals on the Grossglockner Straße. On our fourth day, I hiked from Kals to the Luckner Gasthaus. I first took the local bus to Burg and then hiked over the Greibühl on an easy trail to the Luckner Gasthaus. The first part is pretty steep in the woods, but then you come to a meadow area with good views of surrounding mountains, and last but not least, finally a unique view of the Grossglockner, Austria's highest mountain, on the descent to the Gasthaus Luckner. The hike was 6 kilometers or 4 miles long, with an ascent of 770 meters or 2,500 feet and a descent of 320 meters or 1,000 feet. I really liked the solitude and views of the hike in the beginning and at the little summit called Greibühl. Later on, I joined many hikers because this place is very popular with many hiking and mountaineering options. On day 5, we hiked from the Gasthaus Luckner to the Glorahütte. The trail was not particularly difficult, but a big ascent. And the Glorahütte is also the highest hut in the Grossglockner circuit. The weather was still very nice, and we enjoyed the panoramic views along the way. The hike was 4.5 kilometers long, or less than 3 miles, with an elevation gain of 740 meters or 3,500 feet. We liked the views from the Glorahütte and our last day of full sunshine. our sixth day, we hiked from the Glorerhütte to the Glockner house. The weather changed, but it was still a good hiking day with many different views along the way. The hike was a combination of down and uphill, never really difficult, but still requiring your full attention. The hike was 10 kilometers or 6 miles long, with an uphill part of 360 meters or 1200 feet and a downhill section of 900 meters or 3000 feet. We liked the views, the different angles to look at the Grossglockner, and the fact that we met only a few people on the trail. On our seventh day, the weather turned bad with lots of rain and fog. So we decided to bypass the planned section to the Trauneralm over the Pfandelschorte and take a bus and a taxi to a trailhead, providing an easier trail to the Trauneralm. This was basically a short downhill hike, and we were lucky that the rain stopped for a short amount of time. The hike was only 2.4 kilometers or less than 2 miles long, with an elevation loss of 330 meters or 1100 feet. The Trauneralm is an old historic hut in a beautiful setting and definitely one of the better huts on our circuit. On our next day, the weather improved and stopped raining on our way down from the Trauneralm to Fusch. The trail was easy but long, along the beautiful Käfertal. We had lunch in Verleiten and were able to find a trail above the main road leading to Fusch. The trail was 16 kilometers or 10 miles long, with an elevation loss of 800 meters or 2,600 feet. We liked the solitude of the Käfertal, the Kneippkur installations, but also the fact that we didn't get wet and even the sun came out for a while. On our 9th day, we hiked up from Fusch to the Gleibütze. The originally planned trail was closed, so we arranged transportation to the Ponyhof in Fusch, an alternative trailhead. The weather turned bad again with lots of fog, a bit of rain, but also we got to eat the best blueberries on our trip so far. The trail was steep, slippery, and not easy, but otherwise well marked. The hike was 9 kilometers or 5.6 miles long, with an elevation gain of 1,500 meters or 5,000 feet and an elevation loss of 120 meters or 400 feet. We liked the solitude, the before mentioned blueberries, of course, and the fact that we ended up staying at one of our favorite huts on our trip. This included the best food, the nicest people, and a private room with windows facing the sunrise. On our 10th day, we hiked out over the Brandelschorte to the Kitzsteinhorn cable car station near Kaprun. We retraced our steps from yesterday and turned left at the sign to the Brandelschorte and Kaprun. The first part is an uphill climb and the trail is not easy, with some exposure and sure-footedness required. After the saddle, a relentless downhill trail begins, which is at least a little bit easier, but still very steep. The overall distance was 10 kilometers, or a bit more than 6 miles, with an uphill climb of 230 meters or 760 feet and a downhill part of 1,500 meters of 5,000 feet, which should not be underestimated. We enjoyed the gorgeous views over the entire hike, and especially after yesterday's hike where we couldn't see anything of the surrounding mountains of the Gleiwitzer Hütte. We found more of the ripe blueberries, which made the long descent a little bit easier. At the cable car station, we took a bus to Zell am See and more trains back to Munich.